Almost 2 years ago now, I made a video about Botswana and how they managed to go from one of the poorest countries in the world to the wealthiest on their continent in just a few years, while also not being a dictatorship or repressive or anything. And I thought it was a cool story, whatever. But a lot of people pointed out that Botswana was able to get to where it was because it was sitting on a literal diamond mine. And while I would argue that it shouldn't disqualify Botswana's success, there are many African countries that are rich in natural resources but are also really dirt poor, I figured it was time to follow up the story of Botswana with a similar story, the story of Bangladesh. In proportion to population, Bangladesh is one of the least reported on countries in the Western world. They have more people than all of these countries combined, but when was the last time you heard anything about Bangladesh other than some chemical spill or a sweatshop fire that killed 1,000 people? Like Botswana, Bangladesh is now a rapidly developing nation, and living standards have increased dramatically since independence in 1971. But this time, Bangladesh did so without relying on natural resources. Bangladesh had nothing going for it, and arguably started life as a country worse off than Botswana. So, how did we get here? In the times of the British Raj, the whole region was governed as India, but split into many provinces along religious lines. Some were Muslim majority, most were Hindu majority. The territory that would become Bangladesh was called the Bengal Presidency and was Muslim majority. Hindus outnumbered Muslims by a significant margin and held all of the top jobs in government. In the run-up to independence in 1947, many Muslims were worried that in the new Indian state they could be marginalised by the Hindu majority because there was no neutral third party to settle religious disputes. Indian Muslims lobbied the exiting British government to set up a state for the Muslim majority provinces, which they agreed to. Pakistan on the left, India in the middle, and Pakistan again on the right. The two were lumped together on account of religion, despite not speaking the same language and having over 1,000 miles between them. As expected, this was immediately a disaster for the people of East Pakistan. The borders of these new countries weren't even drawn up until 6 weeks before they were supposed to be in effect, and were extremely complicated. There were over 190 enclaves and exclaves all across the border, cutting off entire communities from police, schools, hospitals, banks and post offices. And the border with India was not open, effectively trapping these residents inside their city blocks with no way to receive help. India was officially the successor state of the Raj, and therefore got all of its institutions, armed forces, courts and financial systems. Pakistan received nothing. The East Pakistani government was originally run out of an all-girls boarding school because there weren't any other buildings in the entire province with enough rooms to run a government out of. Despite having more people than West Pakistan, East Pakistan received far less attention and funding from the central government in Karachi. West Pakistan's official language of Urdu was selected as the official language of the whole country, despite only 3% of East Pakistanis understanding the language. East Pakistan generally voted for the left-wing, secular, reformist Awami League. West Pakistan voted for the religious and right-wing Muslim League. Whenever an East Pakistani became Prime Minister, their government was dismantled by the West Pakistani political class at the earliest possible opportunity. And when 2 West Pakistanis executed a coup of the country in 1958, no region was more repressed than the East. But the trigger point didn't come from any of this. The straw that really broke the camel's back was the weather. The Bhola cyclone was one of the most devastating natural disasters in history. killing up to 500,000 people in mainly Bangladesh. The military government in West Pakistan did barely anything to help the East recover from the disaster. Only 1 military aircraft and 3 crop duster planes were requisitioned to airdrop supplies to survivors. Humanitarian aid from India and the UK arrived before anything from the central government in Pakistan. This was it for the East Pakistan leadership. With all other options exhausted, Bangladesh declared their independence on the 26th of March 1971. In response, the Pakistani military commenced Operation Searchlight, a pointless and unproductive military campaign designed to crush Bengali nationalism through terror. Slums were indiscriminately burned and thousands of people were killed while fleeing. Awami League President Sheikh Mujib Rahman was arrested and imprisoned. Estimates for the number of people killed range from 300,000 by most Western academic sources, but is officially 3 million by the government of Bangladesh. In Pakistan, the figure is 26,000. Eventually, in December of that year, the superior Indian military intervened on the side of Bangladesh, and within 2 weeks, Pakistan had surrendered. And so, on the 16th of December 1971, Bangladesh became an independent country. Sheikh Mujib was sworn in as the first president, and the conflict was over. To recap, the poorest region of British India became the poorest part of Pakistan and then was hit by the deadliest typhoon, a genocide, a famine, 4 coups and a civil war. Henry Kissinger, who is unfortunately not dead yet, famously called it a basket case nation that is doomed to fail. And how wrong he was. Today, Bangladesh is unrecognisable from the poverty-stricken wasteland of the 1970s. 98% of people finish primary school. 96% are vaccinated against deadly diseases like diphtheria and tetanus. Life expectancy is now 72, up from 46. Poverty is down, infant mortality is down, malnutrition is down, mothers who die in childbirth, down, down, down. Speaking of mothers, nobody has benefited more from development than Bengali women. The percent of women who can read has quadrupled since the 70s. Women make up a majority of students, and better education means women are having fewer children and can take care of them properly. And the economy is doing pretty well too. Their economy is now growing faster than Pakistan, India or China. So, how did they do it? 50 years is a short period of time to make that much progress. Well, Bangladesh began a tried and tested method of getting rich quick. They make clothes. There is no secret, they make clothes. After food and shelter, the most important thing humans need is clothes. But unlike food and shelter, clothing is one of the easiest statements of wealth, fashion and personal identity. It's also very easily broken and needs replacing often. This puts fabric in high demand the world over, forever. When you realise this, a lot of history after the Industrial Revolution just clicks into place. Why did the British take over India? For cotton to make clothes. How did the Ottoman Empire modernise? Growing cotton in Egypt to make clothes. Why did the Confederacy need slaves? To pick cotton to make clothes. The USA's largest export at the time? You got it, textiles. In 1862, 2% of the entire world worked in the garment industry. Throughout history, developing industrial nations make clothing as a get-rich-quick scheme, and the same worked for Bangladesh. But because Bangladesh has no other major natural resources and only a very large labour pool, Bangladesh committed to it big time. In 2020, the top exports from Bangladesh were 45% knitted clothing, 42% non-knitted clothing, 2.4% shoes, 2.2% miscellaneous, clothes, 1.3% woven fabric, 1.2% fish. Half of Bangladesh's workforce are employed in the garment industry, and most of them are women. These garments are of course sold to the West. If you check your underwear, your jacket, your shirt or your jeans, all of them are probably made in Bangladesh. or Myanmar, or Vietnam. I really can't overstate how easy it is for countries to get rich through making clothes. And the money that these factories make from Bangladesh stays in Bangladesh. 95% of garment factories are owned by Bengalis. People will always need clothes. The demand is always there, and Bengalis will always have a stable income. There is an obvious downside though, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. The conditions in these factories are appalling. They're nicknamed sweatshops for good reason. Cramped, overcrowded, and with temperatures hitting 45 Celsius, these are not fun places to be. Safety regulations can be non-existent, and so accidents are very common. Due to the lack of proper building codes, fire and electrical faults are two of the biggest killers, as there aren't enough fire exits, and when these factories go up in flames, they can kill hundreds if not thousands of people. The Buriganga River, which flows through the whole country and provides drinking water to millions of people, is used to dispose of industrial waste, so much so that the river is now pitch black. Workers must put in long hours of overtime in order to make ends meet, with some finishing work at 3 AM to begin work 4.5 hours later at 7:30 AM. There is no unemployment insurance. There is no maternity leave. There is no injury compensation. Clearly, something has to be done about this, and the cure for sweatshops is historically the sweatshops themselves. Garment factory wages are pretty low by Western standards, but it's double the national minimum wage in Bangladesh. With this new disposable income, workers are able to afford trade union membership, bargain for better conditions, and afford an education and get better skills to move on to more fulfilling work. Don't take it from me though, take it from the chairwoman of the largest trade union for garment workers in the country.
Bangladesh's booming garment industry has helped to improve women's welfare. Their work earns them economic freedom and dignity at home and outside.
Please design a better website though, this is terrible. This has happened throughout industrial history, first in Europe and North America during the 1800s, and more recently in places like China, South Korea and Taiwan. Now it's Bangladesh's turn to bite the bullet and head on the quest for modernity. But unlike before, Bangladesh isn't doing it alone. Trade agreements with the West can also force the Bengali government to improve labour standards, like this one between Bangladesh and the European Union in 2013. After the Rana Plaza factory disaster that same year, where over 1,000 workers were killed in a fire and building collapse, Western retailers strong-armed Bengali factory owners into letting independent safety supervisors into the factories to assess fire hazards and structural integrity. Since then, 144,000 hazards were discovered by inspectors, and nearly all of them were fixed, saving countless people from potential injury or death. 93% of factories in the Accord now meet the required regulations, allowing people to make a living in safety. And when the Accord expired earlier this year, the factories signed on to an even more comprehensive agreement to replace it. All this hard work has paid off massively. The average Bengali citizen is now richer than the average Indian citizen. In 1971, Pakistan was 70% richer than Bangladesh. Today, Bangladesh is 45% richer than Pakistan, with Pakistani economist Abid Hassan stating,
"It is in the realm of possibility that we could be seeking financial aid from Bangladesh by 2030.
They also fixed the border problem with India, so that's cool. The road ahead is going to be rocky. Bangladesh suffers from success and will soon no longer qualify for trade agreements designed for the poorest countries to sell things to rich markets. As the economy modernizes, mass production of garments and simple products will no longer be appropriate for an educated and wealthy populace. Finding something to replace that will be tricky. The reliance on clothing has also stolen the limelight from other industries that could have been used to fill the void, like electronics. Climate change continues to pose a threat because much of the industry is built along the large rivers bisecting the country and along the coastal areas, as well as all that pollution we talked about earlier. But the biggest problem to Bangladesh's long-term stability is probably politics. Despite this increase in living standards, economic stability and strong growth, Bengali politics is absolutely insane. There isn't much ideological difference between the Awami League and their main rival, the Nationalist Party. Sure, they pay lip service to the economy or whatever, but these parties are mostly a vehicle for two women who hate each other to settle a personal dispute. In a bipartisan move that would be the envy of Republicans and Democrats, they worked to insulate the economy from politics just so that they can continue their stupid family feud without disrupting the lives of everyday citizens. The current Prime Minister is Sheikh Hasina of the Awami League, who is the daughter of the first president, Sheikh Mujib. She was the Sheikh family's only survivor after a 1975 coup because she was on holiday in Germany at the time. Opposing her is Khalida Zia, who is the wife of the man behind the coup, Zaire Rahman. And he did the coup because, get this, the army were bored after the Liberation War and felt like the Indian military intervention had robbed them of a glorious people's victory. But it doesn't stop there, because after more than 20 coup attempts, they were able to kill Zaire, which accidentally brought an even more repressive dictatorship. And of course that wasn't going to last, because nobody oppresses my enemy except for me, so they worked together to get rid of the dictator, and since the 1990s, these two women have been battling it out, finding more and more dumb reasons to put each other in jail every time they get elected. They're so corrupt that they spend nearly as much paying bribes as they do on the health budget. So when Kissinger called Bangladesh a basket case nation, maybe he was half right. Because despite the assassinations, revolutions, counter-revolutions, coups and seesawing between two insane political dynasties, life has consistently been improving for the 150 million people in the most densely populated country in the world. They are simply going through a period of development that nearly every other country has been through. It's going to take a while before Bangladesh is on par with the rest of the developed world, but at least now you know a little bit more about the country that went from rags to stitches.